Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Horror Stories. I know many of you use these episodes to fall asleep, so before you drift off, I'd love it if you could leave a comment letting me know where you're listening from around the world. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. You've been flooding my comments asking for this type of content, and after months of going through submissions, I finally found 3 stories that will make you think twice before swiping right again. These aren't your typical awkward first date stories. They're the kind of encounters that will make you question whether that perfect profile picture might be hiding something much darker behind it. I'm talking about situations where a simple coffee date turns into a fight for survival, where someone's charming messages hide intentions that are anything but romantic, and where the person sitting across from you at dinner might not be who they claim to be at all. Trust me, by the time this video ends, you'll understand why so many people are deleting their dating apps altogether. Before we dive into these nightmare scenarios, I want to give you a warning. These stories get pretty intense, and they're completely real. The people who shared them with me went through experiences most of us can't even imagine. So if you're someone who scares easily, or you were planning on checking your dating apps tonight, you might want to save this video for when you're feeling a little braver. What I'm about to tell you isn't just entertainment. These are real warnings about the dangers lurking behind those carefully crafted online identities. Each story gets progressively more disturbing, and the third one in particular will leave you speechless. I've been making these kinds of videos for years, and this collection is among the most chilling I've ever received. So grab whatever you need to feel comfortable, make sure your doors are locked, and let's get into these 3 online dating horror stories that prove sometimes the scariest monsters are the ones hiding in plain sight on your phone screen. The first story comes from Sarah, a 26-year-old marketing professional who thought she'd found the perfect guy on a popular dating app. His name was Marcus, and everything about his profile screamed husband material, professional photos, a job at a tech company, hobbies that matched hers perfectly. They'd been exchanging messages for 2 straight weeks, and their conversations flowed like they'd known each other forever. Sarah told me she normally insisted on doing video calls before meeting someone in person, but Marcus always had an excuse. His camera was broken. He was away on a work trip. He was taking care of his sick grandmother. The explanation seemed reasonable enough, and his messages were so thoughtful and engaging that she decided to make an exception just this once. They agreed to meet at a trendy downtown cafe on a Saturday afternoon. Sarah arrived a few minutes early and took a table by the window, where she could see anyone coming in. She'd sent Marcus a description of her outfit, a blue sweater and jeans, and he told her to look for a man in a black jacket carrying a leather briefcase. 20 minutes went by, and no one matching that description appeared. Sarah checked her phone and saw a message from Marcus apologizing for the delay due to traffic. 15 minutes later, she finally saw someone approaching her table, but it wasn't the man from the profile photos. The person walking toward her was at least 20 years older than the pictures suggested, with graying hair and a face that looked nothing like the images she'd been seeing for weeks. Yet he was wearing the black jacket and carrying the briefcase exactly as described. Sarah felt her stomach sink as he sat down across from her with a smile that sent chills down her spine. Marcus, if that was even his real name, acted as if nothing was wrong. He started casual conversation as though they'd been planning this meeting for months, talking about work and asking about her weekend plans. Sarah sat there in shock, trying to process what was happening while her mind raced for possible escape strategies. When she finally found her voice, Sarah confronted him about the photos. That's when his demeanor completely changed. The friendly facade vanished, replaced by something cold and calculating. He leaned forward and told her she should feel flattered that someone like him wanted to spend time with her. In a voice barely above a whisper, he explained that he'd been watching her social media profiles for weeks, learning her routines and favorite places. Sarah's blood ran cold as he began listing details about her life she had never shared with him. Her work schedule, the gym she went to, the route she took when walking her dog. He knew where she lived, what car she drove, even what time she usually got home from work. This wasn't just a man using fake photos to get dates. He had been stalking her long before they ever matched on the app. Suddenly, the cafe felt like a trap. Sarah realized she had been lured there under false pretenses by someone who knew far too much about her personal life. She excused herself by saying she was going to the bathroom, but instead of heading toward the back, she walked straight out the front door and didn't stop until she reached her car. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely get the key into the ignition. As she pulled out of the parking lot, she saw Marcus standing at the cafe window, watching her leave with that same unsettling smile. Sarah drove straight to the police station, but without concrete threats or illegal activity, there wasn't much they could do beyond filing a report and advising her to block him on all platforms. But the story didn't end there. In the weeks that followed, Sarah noticed the same car parked on her street at different times of the day. She could make out the silhouette of someone in the driver's seat, but every time she tried to get closer for a better look, the car would drive away. Her friends told her she was being paranoid, that she was probably just noticing cars that had always been there. Then the packages started arriving. Small items left at her door with no return address, a coffee mug from the cafe where they'd met, a keychain shaped like her dog's breed, a marketing book with certain passages highlighted in yellow. Each delivery felt like a reminder that someone was still watching her, still tracking her daily life. Sarah eventually moved to a new apartment on the other side of the city and deleted all her social media accounts. She told me that even now, months later, she still constantly looks over her shoulder and double-checks the locks at night. What was supposed to be a simple coffee date turned into a months-long nightmare that completely changed the way she views online dating and personal safety. The second story comes from Jake, a 29-year-old teacher who thought he'd struck gold when he matched with Elena on a dating app. Her profile was exactly what he was looking for: beautiful photos, witty conversation starters, and a job as a nurse that showed she cared about helping people. They talked for hours every night for almost a month before deciding to meet for dinner at a restaurant Jake had been wanting to try for a while. Elena suggested they meet directly at the restaurant since she was coming from work and didn't want Jake to have to drive across the city to pick her up. It seemed like a considerate and practical suggestion, so Jake agreed without a second thought. He arrived at the restaurant at the agreed time and was shown to his table, waiting to see the woman from the photos walk in at any moment. But when Elena finally arrived, Jake knew immediately that something wasn't right. She resembled the person in the photos, but her behavior was completely different from the warm, fun woman he'd been talking to for weeks. She seemed nervous, kept checking her phone, barely made eye contact, and answered his questions with short, clipped responses. Jake tried to salvage the evening by ordering wine and asking about her work at the hospital, but Elena's answers were vague and contradictory. She didn't remember details from stories she had told him over messages, and when he mentioned specific conversations they'd had, she looked at him blankly, as if she had no idea what he was talking about. Halfway through dinner, Elena excused herself to go to the bathroom. Jake sat there trying to make sense of what was going on when he noticed she'd left her phone on the table. The screen lit up with a text message, and what he saw made his blood run cold. The message was from someone named David, and it said something that completely changed the meaning of the entire night. Phase 2 is in motion. He's buying it completely. Keep him distracted while we finish up at his place. Jake felt his whole world turn upside down reading those words on Elena's phone. His hands began to shake as the implications hit him like a freight train. This wasn't just a bad date or being catfished. It was something far more sinister. Elena, or whoever she really was part of some kind of elaborate plan. And while she kept him occupied at the restaurant, other people were doing who knows what in his apartment. His mind raced back over all the conversations they'd had, looking for clues he might have missed. She had asked a lot of questions about his living situation, his work schedule, whether he lived alone. Questions that had seemed like harmless small talk at the time, but now felt like a calculated effort to gather information. Jake realized that, without knowing it, he had given complete strangers a detailed map of his life, his routines, and most importantly, the exact time his apartment would be empty. Elena returned from the bathroom, sitting down with that same jittery energy. But now Jake could see what it really meant. She wasn't anxious about a first date. She was worried about executing the plan while her accomplices worked. Jake forced himself to act normal, making small talk while his mind worked at full speed to figure out his next move. He couldn't confront her directly. If this was an organized operation, there was no way to know how dangerous these people might be, or what they would do if they realized their plan had been exposed. Instead, Jake excused himself to go to the men's room, pulling out his phone as soon as he was out of Elena's sight. His fingers trembled as he dialed his neighbor's number, praying someone would answer. Mrs. Chen from the apartment next door picked up on the third ring. Jake kept his voice low and casual, asking if she had noticed any unusual activity near his apartment. Her answer made his stomach tighten even more. She told him there had been a moving truck parked outside his building for the past hour, with several men going in and out carrying boxes and furniture. Jake felt sick. They weren't just robbing him. They were systematically emptying his entire apartment while he was having dinner with the accomplice. Everything he owned, everything he'd worked for, was being loaded into a truck while he made small talk about the weather and weekend plans. He hung up and immediately called the police, explaining the situation as quickly and discreetly as possible. The dispatcher told him officers were already on their way to his building since Mrs. Chen had called earlier to report the suspicious activity. They instructed him to stay where he was and keep Elena occupied until they could handle the situation. Walking back to the table was the longest trip of his life. Jake sat down, forcing a smile while Elena continued her nervous chatter about work and hobbies. Every minute felt like an eternity. The restaurant began to feel surreal, like he was trapped in a strange nightmare where he had to pretend everything was normal while his life was falling apart somewhere else in the city. Elena kept checking her phone, clearly waiting for updates from her accomplices. Every time it buzzed, Jake watched her face for any sign of what was happening. Finally, after what felt like forever but was probably only 20 minutes, Elena's phone rang. She answered quickly with a hello, but Jake could hear shouting on the other end. Elena's face went pale as she listened, and then she suddenly stood up, muttering something about a family emergency before practically running out of the restaurant. Jake sat there alone, surrounded by the remains of an almost untouched dinner, trying to process what had just happened. His phone rang a few minutes later. It was the police. They had arrested 3 men at his building, catching them as they loaded the last of his belongings into a stolen moving truck. Elena, whose real name turned out to be Michelle, was spotted fleeing the restaurant and was detained 2 blocks away. Officers explained that it was part of an elaborate scam run through dating apps that they had been investigating for months. The group would create fake profiles, build relationships with victims over weeks or months, and then coordinate burglaries while keeping them distracted on fake dates. Jake's case was just one of dozens under investigation, with the victims losing everything from electronics and jewelry to family heirlooms and important documents. He recovered most of his belongings, though some items had already been sold or were too damaged to return. But the psychological impact lasted far longer than the financial loss. He told me that for months afterward, he couldn't shake the feeling that every conversation, every interaction, might be part of some bigger con. The idea that someone could fake an entire personality for weeks just to rob him left him questioning his ability to trust his own judgment about people. What haunted him most was realizing how easily he had been manipulated. Michelle had played the role of the perfect partner so convincingly that he never suspected a thing until that text message popped up on her phone. Jake said it made him wonder how many other interactions in his life might not be what they seem. How many people might be wearing masks he can't see through. And if you think the first 2 stories were unsettling, wait until you hear what happened to Lisa. This third story takes everything we've talked about and cranks it up to a level that still gives me chills every time I think about it. Lisa was a 24-year-old graduate student who prided herself on being careful with online dating. She always met people in public places, told her friends where she was going, and trusted her instincts when she sensed possible red flags. She had been talking to a guy named David for about 3 weeks. His profile said he was 28, a photographer with a great smile and interests that matched hers perfectly. Their conversations were engaging. He seemed genuinely interested in getting to know her, and when he suggested having lunch at a busy cafe near her university, Lisa felt completely comfortable saying yes. Lunch was even better than she expected. David was charming, funny, and even more attractive in person than in his photos. He told fascinating stories about his photography work, asked thoughtful questions about her studies, and seemed like exactly the kind of man she had been hoping to meet. When he suggested grabbing ice cream and taking a walk through the nearby park after lunch, Lisa didn't hesitate to agree. The park was full of families, joggers, and couples enjoying the beautiful afternoon. They found a quiet bench near a small pond and continued talking while watching ducks swim by. David acted like a gentleman, respected her personal space, and made her laugh with stories about his travels and work experiences. But then something changed. As they chatted, Lisa noticed David's attention drifting constantly toward other people in the park. At first, she thought he was just people watching, but then she realized he was specifically looking at women who were alone. Young joggers without company, mothers pushing strollers by themselves, college students walking alone with headphones in. What made it more unsettling was the way he looked at them. His expression and demeanor shifted completely when an attractive woman passed by. The attentive, charming man vanished, replaced by someone with an intense, predatory stare that made Lisa's skin crawl. He would follow them with his eyes, sometimes turning his head to keep watching long after they had passed. Lisa tried to shake off the growing unease, telling herself she was being paranoid. But then David made a comment that froze her blood. As a blonde woman jogged past them, he leaned in and whispered that she looked easy to approach and had trusting eyes. The way he said it, with a calculating, hungry tone, made Lisa realize this wasn't just casual observation. She began paying closer attention to his behavior, and what she noticed left her cold. David wasn't just watching, he was hunting. Every comment he made about passing women was analytical and predatory. He pointed out which ones were distracted by their phones, which seemed confident, which seemed vulnerable, and which routes they took through the park. Lisa felt trapped on that bench, afraid to make any sudden moves that might trigger whatever was lurking beneath David's charming exterior. She forced a smile and kept nodding while her mind raced for an escape strategy. The park, which had felt safe when she arrived, now seemed like hunting grounds, and she began to suspect she might not be David's date at all. She might be his next target. When he suggested walking to a deeper and quieter part of the park, Lisa knew she needed to leave immediately. She made up an excuse about having to get back to campus for a study group, but David's response chilled her even more. His friendly demeanor vanished completely as he told her they weren't finished talking. He didn't say it as a request. Lisa stood up from the bench, but David grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave marks. He made her sit back down, keeping that unsettling smile, and told her she was being rude for wanting to leave so suddenly. There were other people nearby, families with children, couples walking dogs, but David positioned himself in a way that blocked most of them from seeing what was happening. That's when Lisa noticed something that made her understand the true danger she was in. While he held her wrist with one hand, the other rested on what looked like a small camera bag. But through a gap in the zipper, Lisa could see there was no camera equipment inside. There was rope, duct tape, and what looked like a cloth soaked in some kind of chemical. Her background in psychology kicked in, forcing her to stay calm while processing the terrifying reality of her situation. This wasn't a bad date or even a simple assault. David had come prepared for something much worse, and the way he had been watching other women suggested she wasn't his first potential victim. Lisa began speaking firmly, complimenting his photography and asking to see more of his pictures on his phone. David's ego responded to the praise, and he loosened his grip slightly. Lisa used the moment to scan the park for help, looking for joggers or passers-by close enough to intervene if things went wrong. She spotted a family with small children setting up a picnic about 30 meters away and made an instant decision. She suddenly stood and waved to them with her free hand, calling out that she thought she knew them from somewhere. Their confusion was obvious, but Lisa didn't care. She needed witnesses, people who would remember her face if something happened. David's mask slipped completely. He yanked her so hard she cried out, drawing the attention of several nearby people. That was exactly what Lisa had been hoping for. She used the distraction to pull free and walk quickly toward the family, apologizing for the mix-up while David remained frozen on the bench. Her relief didn't last long. When she reached the family and began explaining she was in danger, she looked back to see David packing his things with quick, deliberate movements. The look he shot her from across the park was pure hatred, and Lisa knew she had just become the target of whatever he had planned. The family kindly walked her to the park exit, but when they reached the main path, David had disappeared. Lisa called the police from the safety of a crowded restaurant, but without a concrete crime to report. All they could do was take a statement and advise her to be careful. That night, Lisa did something that probably saved her life. Instead of going back to her apartment, she stayed with a friend across town. Around 2 a.m., her roommate called in a panic. Someone had tried to break into the apartment, forcing windows and trying to unlock the front door. When campus security arrived, they found evidence that someone had been watching the building, including cigarette butts and food wrappers in the bushes near Lisa's bedroom window. The next morning, Lisa discovered that David's profile on the app had vanished completely. His photos, his messages, everything was gone, as if he had never existed. But the story was far from over. In the weeks that followed, she began noticing the same dark sedan parked in various places around campus. At first, she thought it was paranoia, until other students mentioned seeing the same car in different parking lots and streets nearby. Campus security took her reports seriously, especially after finding the car parked outside the library where Lisa often studied. When they approached the vehicle, the driver sped away, but not before the cameras caught enough of the license plate to trace it back to a rental car company. The investigation revealed something that still haunts her. The car had been rented with a fake ID, but the rental office's cameras clearly showed David's face. What was even more disturbing was what police discovered when they matched his image to reports of missing persons in nearby cities. 3 young women matching Lisa's description had gone missing in the past 8 months, all after meeting men through dating apps. The last time each victim was seen was in public parks or nature areas, places where it was easy to isolate someone without being noticed. David was never caught. Despite having his photo and evidence of his method, he seemed to vanish completely after that day in the park. Lisa said what terrified her most wasn't just how close she came to becoming his next victim, but realizing how meticulously he had planned everything. The charming personality, the perfect date location, even the bag with the materials, all calculated to gain her trust before striking. She transferred to another university in a different state, but the experience fundamentally changed the way she saw the world. Now every friendly conversation with a stranger feels potentially dangerous. Every dating profile could be a carefully crafted lie designed to lure victims. What makes this story even more chilling is that police believe David is still out there, probably using other names and photos but repeating the same pattern. Lisa's case was added to a federal database tracking similar crimes, and investigators believe there could be dozens of victims in multiple states who never managed to escape like she did. The detective on her case told her something that still gives her nightmares. Based on the items found in David's bag and the way he studied other women, they believed she had interrupted him right as he was selecting his next victim. If she hadn't noticed his behavior and sought help, she might have become just another statistic instead of a survivor with a story to tell. These 3 stories represent only a small fraction of the dangerous situations people encounter every day through online dating. What makes them especially terrifying is how normal they seemed at first. Sarah thought she was meeting a successful professional for coffee. Jake believed he'd found someone with shared values and interests. Lisa felt safe meeting David in a public, crowded place in broad daylight. In each case, the predators had spent weeks earning trust, creating the perfect persona, and learning everything they could about their targets before acting. They knew that the key to a successful deception was patience and attention to detail. They knew exactly what their victims wanted to hear and how to present themselves as the ideal partner. But there's something important to remember from these stories. In each one, there were warning signs that something was wrong. Sarah noticed it was strange that Marcus never wanted to video call. Jake sensed that Elena's behavior didn't match the personality she'd shown in messages. Lisa caught David's predatory gaze toward other women in the park. The problem is that when we want something to work, when we think we've finally found someone special, it's easy to ignore those little signs or explain them away. We tell ourselves we're overreacting or being paranoid, but sometimes that discomfort you feel in your gut is your brain picking up on danger signals your conscious mind hasn't fully processed yet. The reality is that online dating has radically changed how predators operate. They no longer need to approach someone in a dark alley or break into homes. They can do it comfortably from a screen, creating elaborate fantasies and building relationships with multiple victims at once. The anonymity of the internet gives them time to perfect their approach, study social media profiles, and craft personas designed to exploit specific vulnerabilities. What's most disturbing about these cases is the amount of personal information people willingly share with strangers online. Think about it. Sarah told Marcus her work schedule and daily routines. Jake gave Elena details about his living situation and when it would be empty. Lisa shared her class schedule and favorite study spots. Information that seemed harmless became weapons in the hands of people with bad intentions. The sophistication of these operations is alarming. These aren't random acts of violence or crimes of opportunity. They're carefully orchestrated plans that take weeks or months of preparation. Fake profiles, stolen photos, backstories that fit perfectly with what the victim is looking for. All part of a strategy few consider while swiping for a date. Law enforcement agencies across the country are seeing a dramatic rise in crimes that begin on dating apps and social media. The problem is that many victims never report what happened. They feel embarrassed, blame themselves for being naive, or think that because they escaped before physical harm occurred, it's not worth reporting. This silence allows predators to keep operating and claim new victims. Detective Morrison, who worked on Lisa's case, told me something everyone should hear. For every victim who reports, there are probably 10 who never do. The true scale of this problem is hidden under layers of shame, fear, and ignorance about what qualifies as a crime worth investigating. But here's the most important thing these stories reveal. In each case, the victim survived because they trusted their instincts and acted when something felt wrong. Sarah walked out of the cafe as soon as she realized she was being stalked. Jake called for help when he saw that text message. Lisa created a scene in the park when she felt trapped. Their willingness to act, even if it meant being rude or drawing attention, saved their lives. This is critical because we're often taught to be polite, to give people the benefit of the doubt, to avoid making others uncomfortable. But sometimes being paranoid or overreacting is what keeps you alive. And often the person who gets upset because you take precautions is showing you exactly why they were necessary. I want to end with something Sarah told me about her experience. For months, she felt stupid for not seeing the signs sooner. She blamed herself for trusting too much, for not insisting on video calls, for sharing so much information with someone she didn't know. But over time, she realized the problem wasn't her trust. It was that someone chose to exploit it. None of these victims did anything wrong by wanting to meet someone special or being open to new connections. The blame lies entirely with the predators who decided to prey on loneliness and the human desire for companionship. These stories aren't meant to scare you into never dating, but to remind you that your safety is worth more than any fear of seeming distrustful or hurting someone's feelings. So the next time you match with someone who seems too perfect, asks a lot of personal questions right away, or always has excuses to avoid your safety conditions, remember these stories. Remember that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who seem the most charming, understanding, and perfectly suited to what you're looking for. Stay safe, trust your instincts, and never apologize for protecting yourself. Because at the end of the day, someone who truly cares about you will understand and support your need to feel secure. And anyone who doesn't probably isn't someone you want in your life. If you found these stories as disturbing as I did, don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this. And please, share your own experiences in the comments. You never know who might need to hear your story to avoid making the same mistakes.